What's going on, everybody? I have Luke Creasy here, covers Marshall for the Herald Dispatch. We're going to talk all about Miami's new defensive coordinator, Lance Guidry, who was at Marshall the last couple of years. We're going to focus on that 2022 season. Team goes 9-4. The defensive numbers are really impressive. First or second in the conference in a lot of the major categories: run defense, pass defense, scoring, total defense. You know, Luke, just in general, we're going to get into specifics, but in general, Lance's defense, how would you define it? What would you say about the style, what he likes to put on the field there?
It's aggressive. And I think that aggressive nature of his scheme is what allowed Marshall to win 9 games. They had trouble on offense really throughout the year, and really relied a lot on that defense to have some of the success that they did. And so, at times I thought the defense was more fun to watch than the offense for a lot. A lot of those 13 games. And I can think of several big moments where, they came up with a key stop or just, their body of work over the course of 60 minutes, was the reason they won a lot of those ball games. Marshall was never out of a game that they played in this year because of that defense led by Lance Guidry. So it's aggressive. It requires active players at nearly every position and athletic players at nearly every position. But I think the bones of that defense, of that scheme, start up front with the defensive line and the pressure that he can create with athletic guys in the trenches.
And certainly I like to get into the position groups with kind of how each one of them, but sticking with his style, you said aggressive. Maybe what do you expect, or what did he put on the field? Either formations, things he liked to do in particular that made it such an aggressive defense, and to have those results that it did. Again, stopping the run, stopping the pass, teams weren't scoring points, the third down defense, and these numbers too, they hold up nationally as well, ranking us among the best too. So what did he do so well, and his philosophy essentially?
I think Marshall fans saw a lot of cover 1, 2, and 4, and that style that just allows the guys on the back end to make plays, and really banks a lot on the ability of the defensive backs. But I think one of the more entertaining aspects of the scheme is his tendency to go with only 2 or 3 down linemen. And the other 2 are playing, kind of in an aggressive stance on the edges, and just creates a lot of commotion around the line of scrimmage. And I think when you do that, it kind of keeps the offense off balance, and lends itself to putting the defense in an advantageous position. They made a big leap from 21 to 22, and a lot of that was because of the comfort level of some of the returning players. But Marshall had a lot of turnover from his first to second season in Huntington. They had 48 new guys altogether on the team, and a lot of those were on the defensive side because of who they graduated, because of who maybe they lost to the transfer portal as far as depth goes. But he got the most out of his guys this year, and it started with just relying on some of the athleticism and playing to their strength.
And Miami has a lot of new guys coming in too. It's over 30 at this point coming into the season. So a lot of new guys, obviously returners as well. What would you say? What's Miami's got defensive guys coming back. Akeem Mesidor did well. Obviously, Cam Kitchens had all the accolades there at safety. What would you say? Look, if you want to play for a Lance Guidry defense, what are the keys? What are the points of emphasis for him that he expects for his players, essentially, whether it's newcomers, returners, whatever it might be? What do you have to do, you think, to play for Lance?
You have to stay disciplined. And I think that's probably not unique to Lance, but especially when he's calling a bunch of these formations and different defensive looks, you've got to know where you're supposed to be. And I think that, a lot of when Marshall got exposed last year was when they didn't play disciplined. And, I can think of, the start of the Coastal Carolina game. That game was in Huntington. There was a lot of hype around that game coming in, and Coastal Carolina on their first 3 drives scored 3 touchdowns and made it look easy. Well, they finished that game with 24 points. after a 21-point first quarter. They buckled down, and the difference in those first few drives, Marshall wasn't in position. They were biting on a fake when they knew it was going to be a run or a pass or vice versa. So you definitely have to stay disciplined. But when those players are disciplined, they're put in a good position to make a play. And I think that was a lot of the reason for the success Marshall had.
Like anytime a new hire is made, I think we all kind of, you try to find out as much information as possible. One of the things that's kind of popped up, either Miami fans, media, whatever, current players, I'm sure, is some of these videos of coach, and seems to be a fiery type of guy, very common to hear from a defensive guy. That's not a surprise to hear that. But what would you say about his personality, essentially, and also maybe his personality, how it maybe reflects on his players on the field?
Yeah, he's very, very energetic when he's on the field, and even in practice when we were able to watch him here in Huntington. Didn't get a chance to talk to him that much, at least on the record, about some things. Marshall's pretty close to the vest with some of the media coverage here in Huntington as far as throughout the season goes, but I was able to talk. I got to know him a little bit last spring during spring ball, when I was kind of coming on to my first year on the beat for Marshall Athletics, and extremely welcoming guy. And I think like any good coach, kind of has a second personality on and off the field. Off the field, he's going to laugh and joke around and make you feel comfortable, make the guys feel comfortable. But on the field, it's all business. And I think that flipping that switch earned a lot of respect for a lot of the players that played for him. And I know he's appreciative of that too. I saw him send out a tweet to Owen Porter, who had had a great year for the Herd on the defensive line, led the team in sacks, and really came to life in Guidry's defensive system. And Guidry said, "You're the reason that I've got the opportunities I have now." And so I don't think you get an opportunity like Guidry has without, one, being likable, two, being able to recruit, and three, being able to get the most out of the players. And I think that Miami got a good one in that respect.
Yeah, and I certainly want to get into, obviously, the recruiting part of it, with what we do, what Miami wants to do as a staff and its recruits. Look, you touched on the Coastal Carolina game, intriguing game there, but I want to talk about the Notre Dame win.
Yeah.
Second week of the season, they go at number 18 Notre Dame. They really get on that national stage. From a perspective, they get that 26-21 win, force 3 interceptions. Defensively, look, if you got to win a game like that, you've got to have tough-minded players, both sides of the ball. But defensively in that game, what stood out to you?
The secondary play, and it started from really the first couple drives. Andre Sam, who had played for Lance Guidry at McNeese State, transferred to Marshall last year, and knew the system, was comfortable in it, and made some big plays all over the field, whether that was deep in deep down the field on a fourth down or on a third down, trying to find his way in the backfield. The secondary really stepped up. Mike Abraham had an interception in that game. He led the team in interceptions last year. And, Stephen Gilmore was one of the highest rated coverage corners that week. And so I think that, Notre Dame wanted to test that secondary because, let's be honest, Marshall played Norfolk State in week 1, and that was not a test. That was a glorified scrimmage because Marshall ended up winning 55-3. And so I think there were a lot of questions about the Herd's toughness, the Herd's true ability on the back end. And I think, the Irish came out and wanted to exploit that, having just come off a tough loss to Ohio State. They had something to prove for themselves. Marcus Freeman, in his home opener, there at Notre Dame Stadium. But, really from the start of that contest, Marshall dominated. I don't think there was ever a true moment where Notre Dame had the momentum, and that was in large part due to the defensive play early on. It was a low scoring game at halftime, and, they continued to make plays. And I think even when, eventually they would give up a big play. Michael Mayer's hard to stop at tight end. And I think anybody who went against him would agree. But it was kind of that bend but don't break mentality. And I think that was the first time it was really put on display. By far the biggest game that Guidry had coached in with the Herd, and coached in with the Herd. I think that was still probably the biggest game in his 2 years here in Huntington. But really just coming out from the start and not letting Notre Dame get away with things early. Notre Dame came into that game aggressive as well. They went for it on fourth down a couple times, and Tyler Buchner played most of that game until he got hurt in the fourth quarter. It was because of the lockdown secondary that made things easier up on the front end. Marshall stuffed the run really well that day, and that also played into their favor.
The secondary stuff you talked about is certainly very interesting. Coach Guidry is a former defensive back, played at McNeese State, obviously became the head coach there. The pass defense numbers really jump off the board last year, led the conference in passed yards allowed, also the lowest amount of touchdowns, the highest amount of interceptions, pass efficiency defense. That tends to lend towards, good secondary play, led the conference in that as well. His secondary in general, what do they do so well? What can you expect there? Again, they've got a defense that needs to be better in all areas. They were middle of the pack or below average in many areas. One of it was giving up way too many big plays, and certainly they'll look to correct that as they replace their two starting corners. But the secondary with Coach Guidry, what does he do well? What does a good secondary look like under Coach?
Honestly, it looks like a wide receiving core. Because at Marshall, they were flying to the football, and I think when you've got a nose for the football, defensive players can obviously catch too. They made a big leap from, I've talked about this year 1 to year 2 leap, and turnover margin was a big one for the Herd this year. It improved mightily in that category, and it's because I think there's a little more intentionality in coverage on the back end. And, with guys like Stephen Gilmore, who's the brother of Stephon Gilmore, who plays in the NFL. You've got Mike Abraham. His dad played in the league. And he's certainly, a guy that, could have a future in professional football. When you've got those guys, it almost makes it easier on the back end to put those guys in position, because they're naturally going to gravitate toward the right spot. But I think it had a lot to do with scheme. I can't think of many times when an opposing wide receiver just flat out beat the secondary. And it's because of that athleticism, that speed, and that knack for getting to the football.
And looking at his defenses, wherever he's been, it seems to have some standout linebacker play as well. Yeah. Linebacker, we've been talking about this every offseason, every season with the linebacker play at Miami. They bring in Francis Mauigoa from Washington State, Francisco. They're trying to get some help. They've got some recruits coming in, and looking for some better play in the linebacker. What is the linebackers? And also, Miami has seen different amounts of linebackers on the field, whether like last year, a lot of it just a 2 linebacker set. What do you typically see with Coach Guidry on linebacker usage and also linebacker play?
Yeah, I think, earlier I mentioned the 2 down lineman, look that Guidry sometimes went with. And a lot of the time, the linebackers were up there on the line of scrimmage too. Whether that was Eli Neal for the Herd, who led the team in tackles, or Kobe Cumberlander, who was a 6th-year player last year. They were very versatile. And I think you saw them anywhere from the line of scrimmage to a traditional linebacker spot to even dropping back in coverage. And so they could really play at any level. And I think that was, that was important to Guidry to get to put those guys in position to make plays, but to have the ability to drop back in coverage if they need to, the ability to hold the line and stick to the run or get in the backfield. So I think that was an important part of the defense, and really just in a way, they weren't linebackers at all. Sometimes they were defensive backs and sometimes they were defensive linemen. A really true hybrid there.
And then You touched on the aggressiveness he likes to play with, and obviously the back end could be helped out quite a bit with good, strong defensive line play. Miami's bringing back some key guys there. I'm very curious to see if they'll take the next step. Again, Marshall, looking at them a year ago, they rank among the conference leaders in a lot of categories, third in sacks. So the defensive line, maybe the points of emphasis, and Miami's bringing in a couple transfers that have some interesting skill sets in terms of the techniques that they've played at their schools. What does he like to do? And again, you're touching on so much hybrid stuff. I assume you're going to touch on that with this one as well.
Yeah, a little bit, but a lot of what they were able to do up front on the defensive line was just having the depth at the position, and that was something that was kind of hit on by the entire coaching staff. It started with head coach Charles Huff. He liked to remind us several times during the year that in that New Orleans Bowl in 2021, the season finale, they had 6 healthy D linemen going into it, and that wasn't enough to impact the game because late in the game they ran out of gas. I think there were, off the top of my head, I can think of 8 or 9 that played in at least 12 games this year for Marshall, and it was the ability to have fresh legs there out on the field that really helped. He had a couple stalwarts and guys like Owen Porter, 1, Kobe Cumberlander, 2. But outside of those guys, it was by committee, and I think that was important to the Herd's success this year. Not necessarily that versatility as I've talked about in other positions, but just the ability to have depth at that position. Anthony Watts transferred in from Purdue. Isaiah Gibson transferred in from Kentucky. And they had a couple others who had been rotational pieces in the past couple of years, but they really added some depth to that defensive line. And Guidry was able to use that to his advantage. I talked to him just before the bowl game, and he said that's probably one of the most talented defensive lines he's ever coached. And because of what they were able to do as far as creating pressure and really it looked to be a strength from the start of spring ball last year, and it continued to be so. Through the Myrtle Beach Bowl. And so I think that was important. Just, they had talented guys up front, yes, but it was more about the depth that they had that led to a lot of that success.
Just talent in general, player acquisition, anything you could provide on him as a recruiter, any stories that stand out to you about maybe the type of recruiter that Coach Guidry is?
I think he's highly touted as a recruiter, and I think you have to be to be successful at any level of college football. But I think because of his head coaching experience in the past, that also helps him out too. Because he's not just looking for guys that will succeed, on the defensive side, but he's looking for guys that can help out in general, whether that's, defense, special teams. I can't tell you how many guys played on special teams that were, major contributors on the defensive side for Marshall too. And so I think, you really started to see that guys that just want to go out and play ball and play ball at a high level. And I think he does a good job of selling that.
Luke, man, I personally want to thank you for doing this. I know you said at the beginning you weren't sure you were going to do it because I'm a Chiefs fan and you're going for the Eagles here in the Super Bowl. And Miami fans, I'm sure want to thank you as well because you provided great insight on Coach Guidry here. So I want to, enjoy the game, but definitely have a good rest of the day, man.
Yeah, for sure. Appreciate it. And if you ever want to get Lance talking about something, just ask him about some Louisiana cuisine. I think that was the longest conversation I ever had with him. So.
Got it. Looking forward to it. All right.